I'm Emily from Emily Bakes Cakes, and I am so excited for the month of November because that is my pie month, because I love to make so many pies for Thanksgiving. And so I thought I would share some of my favorite pies with you this month. The pie I'm making today is called a pear pie, and I don't know if you've ever had one. I had never had one until my mother-in-law made one for us, and it was really delicious. And so ever since then, that has been the pie that I make usually instead of an apple pie, because the pears cook up so soft and tender and delicious, and it just has a really amazing different flavor and texture. And so I'm going to make that today. So I have made quite a few different variations of pie dough recipes, and the one that I found that I go back and forth between two pie dough recipes that I like the most. And the one that I'm going to show you today is from the Pioneer Woman. And she has an amazing tutorial on her website if you go and look at it. And it does this whole really scientific discussion about the ratio of flour and fat and water and how that all needs to come together. And but all I know is that it works really well and comes together really well. Now, the amount that we're making is enough for a 2-crust pie dough, and it calls for lard. And they have on the tutorial on the Pioneer Woman's website, they have a source for this lard, and so this is the lard that I bought it from, like some place in Pennsylvania, and they shipped it to me a couple of years ago, and I've gone through like 4 of these now, I think. But this is my last one. But you can buy the lard at the store, but that isn't necessarily real lard, I don't think. It's more trans fat lard, and you can use shortening if that's what you have. It's just that we have a little bit of, my husband shaking his head, no, never use shortening. But if that's what you have, then use what you have, because this is a really great pie recipe. So I like to make it in my food processor, but you can make it in a bowl. You just have to have stronger hands and arms than I do. So you start out with 2 cups of flour in the food processor. Now the recipe calls for 2.5 cups of flour, but you only are supposed to put 2 cups in to begin with. And I have made that mistake multiple times because I'm hurrying, and so I put the 2.5 cups in all at once, and it's fine. But what we do is we add the fat in next, and it's 3/4 of a cup of butter, okay, and that's cold butter, and then 3 tablespoons, I measured it out, of lard. We're going to also add 1 tablespoon of sugar and 1 teaspoon of salt. And if you're making it for a savory type of a, well, I don't have it. We'll just do this. If you're making it for a savory crust, for a savory filling, then just go ahead and leave out the sugar. Okay, so what we're going to do is we'll just turn on the food processor, and we'll have it go to chunks. Okay. Whoops. So you can see we're just making sure that we've cutting it up. My dad used to have like one of those wire pastry blenders he used, and you just do a couple like that. So now we'll take the lid off, and you can still see little chunks of butter in there. But what we are going to do now is we're going to add in that other 1/2 cup of flour. And this is supposed to coat the flour and butter mixture that's already been there. And you just do it 1 or 2 or 3 times, okay? Don't overmix that. It's supposed to just be on top of it because it's supposed to like somehow protect it with the water. So now what we're going to do is we're going to add a 1/4 cup, a 1/4 cup of cold water. Now you can do the whole like ice water, like actually putting ice in the ice water. I've been fine just doing it this way, and I kind of just pulse it at the same time that I'm drizzling that in. And of course, you may need to add an extra teaspoon or so more depending on how dry your flour is. Now this is where it started to get a little bit tricky, so I'm just going to add a little bit more because it's looking a little dry, because we live in Utah and it is dry. So at this point the recipe had said, you know, dump it out and you just continue mixing it into a dough, like if it comes together and you can push it and it stays together. And I had never done that because I was like, that's too big of a hassle, and I just let my food processor keep mixing it until it became a dough. And that worked really well too. The pie crust was very light and flaky still. But one time I decided to dump it out onto the parchment paper and like bring it together with my hands. And unfortunately, my husband and kids were like, oh, this pie crust is flakier, which, who knows, they maybe just wanted to create more work for me. But as you can see, it comes together, and so we know that we've added, hopefully, enough liquid. Let me see, maybe I want to add just a little bit more. I think I'm going to add just a little bit more because I hate when you're trying to put that together and it's, so I've added just a little bit more because it is winter in Utah. Alright. Okay, now what we'll do, and in that pie tutorial on the Pioneer Woman's website, they always roll it out between two pieces of parchment because it takes less flour that way. And honestly, it was a revelation to me to be able to roll it out on the parchment. So you don't have any extra to add in. So let me get this out on here. Oh, it makes such a mess. I loved being able to just make the dough in the food processor all the way. So now we're just going to have to bring this together. And also, she's more extensive in that they refrigerate it in between each of the times. Like, they make this into the dough, and then they refrigerate it for an hour, and then they bring it back out, and then they roll it out, and then they refrigerate it again once it's in the pan. And I don't do that because I'm usually, like, in a hurry. And I just recently did a thing where I refrigerated pie dough and also didn't, and I could not tell a noticeable difference at all between the two, between the shrieky, if it shrunk or not, or even the flavor and the flakiness. So anyway, so I decided, I don't care about that. So now I am not a very good pie decorator, so if you want beautiful decorations with cool little cutouts, then you're at the wrong place. Okay, let's see, is this about the same for the top and for the bottom? Alright. If I do have a bigger one, then I try and use that for my bottom because that needs more dough to cover the bottom than to cover the top. So there's that. I think this one has more because like I said, I'm terrible at judging space like that, or judging how much things are. Okay, so now put that out. Let's see, I'm going to put this on my counter for just a second to make it a little bit easier to kind of shape it into a circle. And some people really swear by the whole refrigeration thing, so totally do that. But if you've ever liked one of my pies that I brought to a gathering, you know that I have not refrigerated it. Okay. All right. So now we'll roll this out. I know people who are amazing at rolling stuff out, and I am not that person necessarily. That is one hard thing about the parchment, is that, because I just fold these up and use them over and over, is that sometimes with overuse you can see it gets a little bit of the lines in it. It rolls out some of the creases in the paper into the pie dough. Okay. So anyway, it doesn't go as in a beautiful circle as when I watch other people do it. So I just kind of pull it out, and you can see how it left those lines in there, but maybe, hopefully it won't do that again, right? Okay. So I know when it reaches the edges there, big enough. I don't have good leverage. I'm not very hand strong. Okay, let's see where this feels like. It's not big enough yet. So, anyway, we can come back in a second after I got it rolled out. Okay, so you can see this is how I like to measure it out and see if it's big enough. Pull this off. You can see where I have some of the creases, but we didn't have to add any extra flour, so that's good. And then it makes it really easy to transfer it to the pie pan. And I have to tell you, my favorite kind of pie pans are these clear glass ones, because as you know, I really dislike raw. And so this makes it easy for when I pull out the pie to look at the bottom and make sure that it has gotten brown, to just like look and be like, oh, that's cooked and brown. Because if it hasn't, then I usually put it on the bottom rack and then turn the oven up to a higher heat. Okay, so that looks pretty good. If it doesn't reach to the top, then you can just obviously appropriate some from different places so that you will have enough when it comes to crimping the edges later. So yeah, this is a really great, easy to work with pie dough. All right, so now we move on to, actually I'm gonna roll this out. So we'll come back after I roll this out and I'll show you how we prepare the pears. Okay, so pears can be a little bit tricky, right? Because you don't know how ripe they are, and you have to plan ahead, basically. And so I just bought this bag. This is why I decided to make pear pies, because I saw this bag at Sam's Club. And these are Bartlett pears, but I've used Janju pears, Bosc pears, any pears that you have that have gotten soft. This one I decided not to keep peeling and using because it feels extra woody, like trying to peel it didn't work. And you can see that in the inside, some of them have that brown and they're a little bit soft, and so you just scoop that out. It hasn't mattered necessarily, as long as they're at least a minimum of ripe. Like, you don't want to use purely green. You wouldn't want to use this green. But I have used ones that are mostly yellow, but the ones that give the pie the best flavor are the ones that are ripe, like this. And so one of the nice things about the pears is that you can get them kind of all year long, and plus they're a good winter fruit, right? So what we do is we just slice it up. We peel them, core them, and slice them up. Now, in order to make the filling really great, what we need to do is have a half cup of sugar. Let's see. So there's a half cup of sugar and 3 tablespoons. Oh man, I must have, oh no, there it is. 3 tablespoons of flour. And this is how you get kind of like that good. Okay, 3 tablespoons of flour, a teaspoon of cinnamon, and that really adds a lot of flavor. My father-in-law is allergic to cinnamon, and so my mother-in-law uses nutmeg or allspice, and that's fine too. And then a 1/4 teaspoon of salt, and I ran out of salt in my container, so I'll just put some of that in there like that. Now, this next ingredient that goes in here is either lemon zest, but a lot of times I don't have a lemon, and so what I do then is I just get my lemon juice from in the fridge that comes in the bottle, and I just sprinkle it, if I remember it, on top of it. But today I happen to have a lemon, and so just going to add, it's supposed to be a teaspoon of lemon zest, and I think it really brightens it up. It adds just a nice fresh flavor and a contrast to the pears, because pears are pretty sweet. So, and the problem with working with pears, obviously, is that they turn brown super fast. And so you want to be adding this in there. Okay. Well, I think that's good enough. That's enough. Okay. So once you have this all kind of mixed together, then you just kind of layer it in with the pears. So you cut the pears in, and then with every layer of pears, then you add in another layer of the flour mixture. So as you can see, so this would be a good time also to preheat your oven to 450, because what you're going to do is you're going to put it in at 450, and I like to put it on the lower rack. If not the lowest rack, then the next to lowest rack. And you keep it at 450 for 10 minutes. Then you lower it to 350 and you cook it for 35 to 40 minutes, or until the pie crust is all nice and brown to your desires, and you can see the juice bubbling. So that's just like a beautiful pear. So, all right, we'll come back after I have finished filling the pie crust with all of the pears. All right, so we have the last of these peeled, and as you can see, I have this really great tool that my parents got for me for when we would can pears. You can see you just kind of scrape out the gross middle, and that's the problem with waiting to let them ripen, right? Is that they turn brown kind of in the middle, and you never know what you're going to get. But this bag that I bought was 4 pounds of pears, and so I'm using all of them except for one, and it does shrink down quite a bit once it cooks. So the original recipe calls for 4 to 5 cups of sliced pears. The problem is that that doesn't fill it as full as I like it, to have a higher ratio of pear and crust. So basically I put in probably, I don't know, 6 cups of sliced pears. Okay, so we'll just add in some more of these here. Make sure you're distributing it. Uh-oh. Let's see. To the sides. Okay, let's see, and need to put some more flour down, as you can see. And these pears they just have such a lovely juice. When we eat it, I like to have it mostly with cream. I think my husband and kids like that with vanilla ice cream. But it's delicious no matter how you end up deciding to eat it, obviously. If you've never had a homemade pie crust, I would highly recommend you trying it, just because there's such a huge difference. I gotta rinse that out. There's such a huge difference between store-bought pie crust and homemade, in my mind. It makes it very worth it to have to do it. Before I got a food processor, I would have to sit and rub the flour and butter together. Man, it was a killer on my hands. So, this one has a lot more gross stuff in it, but that's the great thing about having a big scooper, is you can just scoop all of that out. So now once we finish putting this in, and this is a part that I have forgotten as well, and it still turns out delicious either way, and I don't know that I necessarily notice it when it's not there, but I do notice it when it is there, because it's just so, it adds a nice flavor, because like I said, I want to add more sugar and more butter into your life. But I take the half a cube of butter that's left over from making my pie crust. So this is 4 tablespoons. And I cut it up and sprinkle it all over, and sometimes I thought, oh wow, a quarter cup, that's way too much. So if you think that, then go ahead and don't use that, but sprinkle about the recipe, original recipe calls for 1 tablespoon, but I'm using 4 tablespoons. So, because I like the richness that it adds, and also I just love butter so much. Okay, so now that we have that, let me move this to the side. I have my pan or my top, and I don't do decorative things because I don't like to waste, as you guys all know, so I just mostly make cuts like that, and then try and make it be in the middle, but sometimes, since I don't roll it out very evenly, who knows. Okay, so we obviously have a lot right there and needs to come over here. So we're going to tuck it under, and if you've rolled it out really well like you're supposed to, then you would be able to tuck it under the bottom layer of crust. Let's see, it doesn't matter, it's fine. It all tastes so good, nobody cares how it looks, right? Alright, so now we just are gonna do the pinching it together. And I really don't have a problem with this pie bubbling over and burning to the bottom, you know, having the sticky syrup burn to the bottom of my oven. But if you're worried about that, then you should just put either tin foil, or if you're like me and you forget that we're going to do that, and so everything's all heated up in the bottom, then you can just put tin foil on the rack. Okay, so now I'll add a couple more slices. Okay, so now to finish it off, all we need to do is either put a cream, and I'm using cream instead of an egg, or an egg wash on top. And so for the egg wash, you would just crack an egg and whisk it up, and then put maybe a little bit of salt in it or something, and then you brush it on. But I like, if I have cream, then I like to use cream instead. So it creates a nice glaze on the top that is really cool looking. I think it makes it look more attractive. And then also it gives something for the sugar that you sprinkle on to stick to. So let's see, I'm not professional at this, obviously, if you want to, but I think it makes it taste good. And okay, so, and I love the way it looks. Okay, so then I just have these bigger sugar crystals that I got at West and Gigi, and you can just use regular sugar if you want. And you just kind of sprinkle it around, and it creates and gives it a nice crunch on top. And like you can see, I put too many right there, so I'll kind of move it over a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to put this in the oven on the second to bottom shelf for 10 minutes at 450 degrees, and then I'm going to turn my oven down to 350 for and set the timer for probably 40 minutes, because I've usually had to cook it for longer just to make sure that the bottom crust is brown and the top crust is brown. So we'll check back in. I actually cooked it for 50 minutes, and for the last 5 minutes I raised the temperature up to 400 degrees because I took it out and I was looking, and you want to see the juice bubbling. You can see the juice bubbling right there, and you want to make sure that that is happening. And then you look at underneath and you can see the brown crispy, and that's how I knew it was done. And so since it was on that bottom layer down there, that's how I was able to get the bottom of the pie to be crispy and cooked. So anyway, I hope you end up making it, and we'll eat it tonight.